Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Farm Boy Meets the World, or FBMW for short. My name is Neil Harder, aka the Farm Boy. In this episode called The Anarchist, I dive deep into the mind of philosopher and educator extraordinaire DaN McKee. Hailing from the UK, Dan is a busy man who currently works as a teacher and a writer. He uses his PhD in philosophy for daily application on the two different websites that he runs. One is called everythingdanmckee.com, and the other is called philosophyunleashed.com. As I'm sure you have gathered, he is not your conventional thinker. With thought-provoking works like Authentic Democracy and Atheist Punk Rock Teacher under his belt, Dan challenges the status quo with his unique blend of philosophical insight and rebellious spirit. He is known for his unique views on anarchism and his extremely insightful writing on Philosophy Unleashed. I actually found DaN McKee because I was doing some research on my own for a philosophical inquiry that I had, us university students always asking weird questions, and his website helped me find a solution. So join us in this episode as we explore a wide array of topics, from anarchism to democracy, religion to STEM, prison to school systems. With DaN's sharp intellect and unorthodox perspectives, this episode promises to be a journey of enlightenment and contemplation. So buckle up and prepare to question everything you thought you knew after having listened to this episode of Farm Boy Meets the World, or FBMW for short, with DaN McKee. Thank you guys. My name is Neil Harder, aka the Farm Boy.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds perfect. That sounds good. Sorry about that. We're just this is our first time doing a virtual interview. We we typically interview people that are on the same continent as us, in the same area.
I saw that on the previous ones and I thought I better be clear that you know that I'm in the UK, but it is called Meets World. So, you know,
Exactly. It's Farm Boy Meets the World. We cannot restrict ourselves just to California, just to the United States. So yeah, you said that you were able to look at some of the previous work we've done. Do you mind talking to me a little bit about that? What did you see?
yeah, I can't actually remember the name. Oh my gosh, it was it was maybe the first one. And I've even forgotten what it was about now. I really liked it at the time. It's been a very busy week. Who is a female professor?
Yes. It was Nicole Serpa-Vielma. We talked about economics.
Yes, that was it. And I really enjoyed it. But yeah, that was, I guess, a week ago. I listened to that, and it's been a crazy week.
I'm sure it has been. So actually, I wanna talk to you about what's a little. Obviously, we're gonna get into the nitty gritty, some more details behind your work and stuff like that. But you just mentioned how busy you are. I kind of want to talk about what's going on with you right now. I think on your blog it says you're no longer a teacher anymore. Is that correct?
No, I was I stopped being a teacher
Uh-huh.
for a, and I came back. So I actually wrote a book about it. Called Anarchist, Atheist, Punk Rock Teacher. I got sort of sick and fed up of teaching in schools for a range of reasons. And in, I guess it was 2022, 2022. It was New Year's, and I quit on New Year's Day.
Oh
But
wow.
you have to give notice. So I sort of gave my notice, but I was still there till the summer, till the end of that academic year. And I genuinely thought I was walking away from teaching for good.
Uh-huh.
And the summer came, and my wife and I went to Scotland. I had no plans. She was very great. Just, she'll support us while I figure out what I'm going to do. And September came along. She's a teacher as well. She went off to teach, and I was at home, sort of writing this book and working on another research project about prisons and schools. And I just really missed teaching straight away. And
Oh wow.
I started. I have some friends who work at other places, and I did some freelance teaching political philosophy and stuff at various sort of schools that would have me in for a day or something. And I loved it. And I just realized, like, I've got to get back to teaching. So September till December 2022, I wasn't a teacher. And by 2023, I got a maternity leave position to cover someone who's having a baby at a school. And I'm still there now because she decided to not come back, because it turned out that the commute to the job was bigger than she wanted to do. Now she had a child, so everyone was sort of like, it's a short-term thing, and I thought that was great because I'd quit. So it's like I can have a small dip a toe in, see if I like it, and then leave at the end of that summer. But no, she was like, no, I'm going to get a job closer to home. So if you want it, go for it. So I applied to stay, and I'm still there now. So yeah, I was not a teacher for about a term of school.
Oh, wow, wow. That's interesting. Honestly, it sounds like you got a little bit lucky with that spot coming up or opening up. You got that right on time, the availability for you. That's perfect, honestly.
Yeah, it did. It felt like the perfect job as well. I mean, that was the thing I sort of knew when I went away from it. It made me realize a lot of it was the school I was at, systems that are in place in a particular place, which aren't universal, but you feel a part of, you mistake the job for a job. And so I was waiting for a job that felt right. And this school felt right because it was mainly philosophy focused. So in the UK, I know it's not true in America. In the UK, we have this subject called religious education or religious studies that every child at school between the ages of 11 to 18 have to study. So no one has to study philosophy, but by law, everyone has to study religion in some way. And obviously, there's a lot of philosophy that builds into the religious stuff. But the jobs that are there in the UK are mainly religious studies teachers, where there's a bit of philosophy. There's what we call A-level qualification in the old, and then at university and stuff, you can do philosophy. So loads of the jobs are religious studies focused, and my passion is philosophy, not the religion side of it. There's a reason the book is called Anarchist, Atheist, Punk Rock Teacher. So having a school that really prioritizes the philosophy bit is for me, like, I love teaching the religious, the theology stuff as well, but having that opportunity to teach them just sort of pure philosophy and not just religious philosophy is great.
Yes. What is the kind of the reasoning behind including a religious studies in the curriculum for the UK?
I mean, I think bluntly it's evangelism, because we have a national, the Church of England, it's part of the state, so that the monarch is the head of the church. And there's, within the House of Lords in our parliamentary system, there are representatives of the church. So when making laws about education, and obviously the history of schooling goes back to the church providing education, there's a sort of thing in there that says people should be instructed in religion, which at the time, many years ago, Christian country, there was sort of a reason for that. But now it's a historical legacy, but there's still that evangelical influence, because there is sort of in the law, everyone has to study religion. It doesn't have to be, it shouldn't just be one religion. It shouldn't just be Christianity, but every school must teach Christianity. So you can teach a range of different faiths, but you must sort of present the idea that the main religious tradition of the country is Christian. So every student going through school should come out having learned about lots of different faiths and non-faiths, atheism, humanism, things like that. But there should be a kind of weighting towards, when covering different world religions, Christianity should always be. So we have these qualifications called GCSEs, which students do between the ages of 16 and 18. That's not true, 14 and 16 for GCSE. And you can choose any second religion to study, but everyone has to study Christianity if they do that qualification.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's kind of built in for those historical reasons, and now it's just there. But I mean, there's a positive to it, which is that we do talk about differences between faiths and non-faith and all these big questions. So, like, we have a very diverse country. It is statistically, according to the last census, not a majority Christian nation anymore. And so we have this dialogue about religion in schools, and students tend to understand, different faiths. They're not mysteries to people. And so even though there's this sort of quite old-fashioned law, the way it's taught makes, I think, students quite equipped for a pluralistic, diverse world in a way that maybe in America, I mean, my own experience of American education in terms of religion is you can't, because of separation of church and state. So people actually don't, at a regular school, have any real exposure to faiths of any kind that may not be their own, home background or things like that. So I think it's really useful. We've got lots of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, all kinds of religious prejudice, and we get to actually address it and understand. So it's kind of, you're able to sort of say, well, this is what this faith actually believes. These stereotypes are not true, and this is the history of things. So I think it's got a really good even though personally, I'd love it if we all did philosophy and got rid of the legal requirement for religion. I think it's got a really good value, and I'd still think we should keep some element of that as a sort of sociological important thing in schooling to get students to be aware of not everyone believes the same, and even if you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jewish person or whatever, you're probably going to believe something different than other Christians or Muslims or Jewish people. So there's diversity within faiths and outside of faiths. And so I think that message that comes through this mandatory education in it is actually quite an important idea.
I agree. And I actually kind of envy the system that you guys have in the UK. Honestly, growing up, going all throughout my school system, it obviously, as you know, and as you mentioned, there's this complete separation of church and state, at least a de facto separation of church and state, or excuse me, de jure separation of church and state. So I definitely can see the value, especially now that I'm attending university and I actually do have access to that pluralist education. I definitely has opened my views and allowed me to, I guess, address all of the stereotypes and the assumptions that I had about these others, if you will.
Yeah,
So
I think that's one of the great things about education in general, and that's a huge area for so many people, that your own personal faith or lack of faith will put you in a bubble of what the world is and the norms of the world. So the more you kind of realize that it is your own bubble and there's lots of other bubbles and we need to kind of get along, I think it's probably it's more beneficial.
yeah. So actually, we're definitely gonna move into a little bit of an introduction here, get to kind of talk about who you are, stuff like that. But I do have one more question about the theology and the school system, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, you said that you guys covered basically the theology aspect of the various religions, basically what their doctrine, if you will, is. But what I'm wondering is if you guys actually do, maybe this would be a what is this called? A multidisciplinary class that you guys have, but do you guys study the history of Christianity and study the history of the various religions?
So yeah, yes and no. We've it's very kind of loose what you can and can't study. So people tend to sort of base it around their own specialisms or interests. For this GCSE or A level, these qualifications that are sort of standardized national exams, there's a certain specification that you've got to follow. But even that, it's usually a mix of history, theology, and just sort of blunt facts about the faith. So there's things like you say, doctrinal things. What is it that most Christians believe, most Hindus believe, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity of interpretation, but you can't really tell that story without some of the historical stuff. And there's also the broader theological question, from the top question of like, is God real? Can God exist? Is any of this like meaningful at all? To theological questions within faith, what is revelation? Can we understand God? If there is this transcendent being beyond our understanding, why do we think we can understand them, even if they do communicate with us and things like that? So when you start studying multiple religions or multiple interpretations of the same faith, you kind of have to look at textual analysis of scripture and different historical, so with Christianity, like questions about the historicity of where the text came from and how they clash with historical data and different beliefs about their inerrantness and their divine providence versus sort of are they historical documents. So that becomes part of the conversation, but it's usually wrapped around that sort of theological really questions about epistemology, sort of, is this knowledge, is this faith, is faith the same thing as knowledge, and how do we come to these different kinds of knowledge? So we might have sort of scientific empirical knowledge of the world, but we also might have a different kind of knowledge, a sort of spiritual knowledge or something like that, that is a different sort of thing and not to be dismissed just because it doesn't meet that criteria, versus also the idea that no, we should dismiss it because it's not knowledge. Faith is not knowledge. So those big questions come up, but the history, like we have the distinct subjects like anywhere else. So history is a thing, and you can specialize in biblical history if you want, but usually that would be in a theology department at university. When you're at school, a religious studies qualification is kind of this mixture of all that stuff in as much a manageable chunk as between the ages of sort of 16 to 18 or 14 to 18, depending on what qualifications they take, a student can sort of manage.
I see. So I have a dilemma. I've heard a couple interpretations, and one quote that I've really enjoyed is that religion was man's first attempt at science, at understanding the world. And I definitely can see where that interpretation comes from. But for me personally, I'm sure you can relate to this very well and very intimately. I just simply cannot believe in God. I actually want to really badly. I want to believe in God. I want to believe in whatever it is that all of these people around me gives them power, gives them energy, a source of life, gives them meaning. But I simply cannot do it. I've tried to convince myself that God exists. I've tried to have a logical conversation with myself and other people about how it could be that God does exist, but I I simply cannot accept that a God exists. So, how do you what does someone in a position like myself do where they want to believe in God so badly, but they just can't? Maybe there's something that I'm looking for that I'm just misrepresenting or misidentifying as God, something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of options. One is there's a thing in philosophy called anti-realism, which I'm quite a fan of, although personally I find it difficult, where you kind of accept there is no thing. So in this case, God, that you're an anti-realist about God. There's no such thing, but you kind of choose to go with it anyway. So you could be anti-realist about loads of things. You could be an anti-realist about God. You could be an anti-realist about like ethics. Like maybe there is no such thing as actually right or wrong,
Mhm.
but right or wrong has some sort of use, some function, something that we appreciate. So we're going to live our lives as if there is a thing called right and wrong and take it very seriously, even though kind of intellectually we know it's not true. We're still going to really respond like things are right and wrong. And we can do the same with God. So we can say, well, this thing isn't real, but like, what do I get if I believe in God? If I act like someone who believes in God, I'll never fully believe because I've got this belief that there isn't one. I'd say I know there isn't one, but I will act anyway. So I might even join a particular faith, go through all of the sort of social side of that, and go through all the rituals of it. Because, like you say, if you want that, you still get all of that. And if you think about it that way, there's lots of people who believe but actually have doubts and things. So you kind of committing to the anti-realist position that there is no God doesn't prohibit you from getting involved in the faith, because you're kind of the same as someone who never would say that they don't believe, but they've got loads of doubts about it. So that's like one possibility. My problem with that is I always kind of feel like you need that truth behind something to properly motivate you. So same with ethics, if I'm
Uh-huh.
really going to be upset about something, if I'm going to go to war for a cause because I feel so strongly about it, I've got to really believe it is right or wrong. I can't be sort of saying I'm playing a game in my head. So with God, it's sort of like, yeah, if I'm gonna, pick a faith, but if I'm going to dedicate my life, so say Islam, I'm going to pray 5 times a day, every day. I'm going to fast for the month of Ramadan. I'm going to go through all this stuff for something I don't believe, but I kind of want the social benefits and the spiritual benefits, the internal psychological benefits.
Mhm.
It's kind of hard to really do that. And so for me, that option exists but isn't real. So I think what you said about maybe it's something else. So I would go like, why? And I think that first question about science and our early attempts, to me, that does ring true. If you look at human beings, we are storytellers, as Hollywood keeps telling us. We are storytellers. Everything we say, we create narratives. We see faces where there aren't faces. We want explanations for things, even when there aren't. Like the thing we really can't cope with is the randomness and uncertainty of life, and that is the most important thing to recognize. Like we can't guarantee the world. I was talking to some students this afternoon about Buddhism and looking at some Zen koans, and there's this great one about someone who wanted a message of prosperity and hope to be written for his family, and this wise person writes him a message which basically says, father dies, son dies, grandson dies. And the point of that is a message of hope and prosperity, because if everything goes brilliantly in your life, that's the way it should go, right?
Mm.
The the oldest person dies, then the next second youngest, and then the
Uh-huh.
youngest. If it goes in any other order, things have gone terrible, right? Something's wrong. But people don't like it because you're going to die. So it's like we don't want to think about that, right? Because but the truth is we are going to die, and importantly, we could die today. Like, so it's like I'd love to die when I'm an old person, but I could die today. I could get hit by a car, leave the house, and that's it. And that is the sort of the truth of our life. That happens to people all the time. There's no reason, there's no rhyme. You read the paper, someone dies because we can say, oh, it was an earthquake that killed them, but it wasn't. It was an earthquake, and the fact they happened to be at that place where the brick fell on their head, which they didn't need to be. You know, it was totally random. They got cancer not because of any lifestyle choices, but because of the things that made them make the lifestyle choices, which are out of their control, because of various biological elements. You know, they got cancer. It's random. They died. So we don't like that. We really want there to be some sort of explanation, some sort of cause, purpose, and things like that, because that makes more sense than the scary truth that it's all totally random. So we invent stories that explain things. You know, if I feel ill tonight, I will think about, well, what have I done today? Who did I come into contact with? Have I eaten something? I want to the idea that maybe my body just, is having a bit of a spat and something happens and I just feel bad. That doesn't come into it. There's got to be a reason. So God is like the ultimate reason, isn't it? That's why we kind of want that. So for me, part of the reason I would like there to be a God is because it means there's sort of a purpose. It means there's someone thinking and planning it all. It means if something's going wrong, I can speak to someone and say, like, hey, I don't like this. I'd like, if you could intervene, I'd like that not to happen or something. And that's sort of nicer than the scary option of no one cares, we're on our own, and it's crazy. Anything terrible could happen to anyone at any moment. So I think, like, for me, that's my way of kind of, because I also, like you, I've really tried to believe in God over my life, and it just doesn't happen. And I spend all day, every day teaching religion as well as philosophy and talking about these ideas. And like I get left cold. The best ideas in theology, the best, just don't work. Other than that Buddhist idea, but unfortunately, there doesn't need to be a God for this idea. But most Buddhists don't believe in God. This idea of like accepting the randomness, the impermanence of the world, and I think doing that suddenly makes you go, yeah, I don't actually need that person because I accept the random. I accept that there is no rhyme or reason and I can control very little. And, I was told by a therapist once, I had health anxiety disorder and had to go to a therapist after my parents died of various, like quite young, of various health things. And it made me think, I must die anyway. And they basically said, what you really have at bottom is intolerance of uncertainty. So I get scared. I think I'm going to die because really I could. And that's part of the therapy. Like, you could. It's not an irrational thought. It's irrational to worry about it because everyone could at some point. And you just got to make peace with the random. And when you make peace with the random and you make peace with the fact there's no God, it's not a loss. It's not an emptiness. It's just like the way things are. And accepting that, to me, made me realize, yeah, you don't need there to be a God. And then if you still think, I want a God, what you might want, for example, is the community. You might go like, well, other people believe in God and they do. Like, I really admire religious people who do lots of charity work. And they seem really motivated to do that. And it's really sad to me that they're doing it because they think it's the right thing to do, because their faith tells them that, and maybe they'll be rewarded in the afterlife, heaven or something. Whereas for me, I really just want to find some people who want to do that charity work because they want to do it. Because
they don't feel like they're saving themselves from going to a burning hell or something of that nature.
Yeah. So to me, it's like, that's the thing. And I think there is, if you could just bite the bullet and believe in a God and join a religion of any, you can do all that stuff and be part of a community and do that. So for me, again, the other thing that people talk about a God-shaped hole.
Oh yes, I've heard this before.
Yeah, I think it's more of a God-shaped filling of a hole that we've all got for various different stuff at different times in our lives. And it might be one for charity, for community, for some sense of purpose, for control, whatever it is. But yeah, to me, God is just another story we've told. And the fact these different cultures have all sort of told very different versions, but ultimately the same overarching point. There is someone who created everything, responsible for things, who can change things with powers beyond our understanding. you know, it comes I always think of, we're born and the first thing we see is something bigger and powerfuler than us who sort of
Mm.
grabs us, and it's very scary. And then they're the people who, if we don't have those people looking after us, we die, because we're not a very smart species. We can't just be born, left, and develop. So we need someone. And so just being imprinted from the very moment of birth with, there's this big, powerful, loving thing out there that cares about you and created you. It's not surprising that that's kind of a story that we keep deep inside us and place over the world. But to me, that doesn't make it true. It just makes it understands why, we miss it. The same way if you had a home where you came from, you were raised, and like, I don't know, they had particularly great pizza there, you're always going to miss that pizza when you move away and realize, I miss the pizza I had growing up. That home feels like pizza. I think for all of us, home feels like that powerful, loving thing that took us from the womb at some point and fed us and nursed us into life. And so we kind of miss that, because there was a point in all of our lives where someone did care, someone did have a plan, someone was looking out for us and could intervene and help us. And we grow out of it because we become independent, and we're just looking for that to still be there.
Right, right. I've definitely been playing with the idea of people starting to accept faith and starting to incorporate faith into their lives when they're at the lowest, quote unquote, like the lowest points of their lives. I don't think it's a coincidence that you see a lot of people when, they're these are just examples that, when they're in prison, or, when they've been injured extremely badly, or, basically, as you say, the comfort of their life is removed, and it leaves a person with very little other than this abstract thing that they can use as a comfort. And honestly, I kind of, now that you put it for me in that way, honestly, I really do see the value of the anti-realist perspective about God, and kind of accepting internally that God may not exist, right? That really, some people may just come to the conclusion completely that God does not exist, but if they're still able to uh, experience some sort of comfort from even the idea of God existing, then I don't honestly see the negativity in that at all.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, the only problem really with religion in society is when it impinges on people. The idea of it being a personal thing that allows people to get by in a world that is difficult for all of us, in a life that is difficult for all of us, is kind of wonderful and beautiful, and people should be allowed to believe what gets them through the day. Um, the problem is when, and this is why anti-realism is kind of good, when you believe it is definitely true and the truth and the only truth, and
Right.
you marry it to scripture, and that's a really important thing for me. The psychological need for a god is not the same thing as the religions that come up around it, which for me are always someone basically trying to tell you, I know what God says and I know what God wants, and if you do what I tell you, that's the correct thing,
Mm.
which can be corrupting. And then that assuredness is when it becomes, well, so we need to change some laws and we need to prohibit you from doing things you want to do because God says it's wrong. And so that's when there's a problem, because like, I say I've got a lucky charm, I don't know, like every time I got a job interview, if I wear a particular pair of socks or something, that's
Mm.
my business, who cares? But if I then say, like, everyone who has a job interview has to wear this brand of socks, they must, this is the law now, because if you go to a job interview without it, it's the end of the world. Like, I shouldn't be allowed to make that change in other people's lives because of this interesting belief I have that brings me comfort. um and I think that's the problem with religion. I think of my sweet grandmother, who was a religion. My granddad was a Methodist minister. Um,
Oh wow.
and he died. My dad died, and she had her faith to kind of keep her company. She was looking forward to being reunited with them both in heaven when she died, and that kept her going. Even when she really didn't want to keep going, this idea of all that stuff, and that's fine. But if that belief also then made her, vote to take away people's rights or say certain people don't have a right to exist and things like that, that beautiful story of like, oh, that personal faith that really, got through, suddenly becomes something a bit more sinister and problematic. So I think it's that thing of we need to recognize that we don't know, and I think, to be honest, even people who truly believe, it's such an arrogant position to truly believe that with all the evidence. And I don't mean the evidence of there not being a God. I mean the evidence of all the other faiths and all the other interpretations. And the one premise all religions believe in about God is beyond us. So whatever God said, if God said anything, the idea that we fully understood it, the idea that it's this eternal message that can never be changed, that's the stuff that doesn't ever ring true, even, in your most open-minded to religion, because to me, there's no reason that would be true. That if God really had this message, God wanted us all to know, and create it, God could put that in our heads. God could clarify, God could come down 24/7 and say, no, you got it wrong. And, language, communication, I don't understand fellow humans who are from the same town as me. We can go for a coffee and have a chat and think we've understood each other and realize we haven't. When we get home, I'm talking about, say, my day at work, they talk about theirs. I think they really hate their job. They think I really love my job, and it turns out we're both completely wrong. They love their job and I hate my job. We don't know. We hear words, we interpret. So, like, if we can't get it right with people on our level, the odds of us getting it right with a divine being that's beyond any kind of human understanding is crazy. So then to think, because we have these words that someone told us came from God, when there's so much historical evidence that they did not come from God, that they're human written constructs, often at a time where people who might have been witnesses to things couldn't themselves read and write. So we can't confirm what, if I couldn't read and write and I told you my story and you wrote it down for me, I can't say, yes, what you wrote is true. You could write anything and I'll nod and say, yeah, that's what I told him. And who knows? So, so I think that's the problem. Anyone who becomes dogmatically committed to any kind of scriptural, this is what God wants, and doesn't let people sort of do their own thing about the divine, that's where it gets problematic to me.
I agree completely, and honestly, I would even further the argument to the sense that I think, and you tell me how you feel about this, but I think that honestly, it may be kind of negative to even believe in a universal will at all, in any sense, a universal will with whether it relate to religion, or a universal will whether it relates to obviously some sort of government doctrine or something of that nature, or even nationalism, for example. I think that having a belief that there something and or something that someone is saying is inherently true and there is no other option, I think that that's extremely dangerous. And yeah, tell me how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the fundamental principles of anarchism, really, that we can collectively work together on all kinds of things and have all kinds of agreements and interrelations and things like that. But we're never going to find universal consensus on things, and we shouldn't. That people need that autonomy and space to do their own thing within even communal things, and we can agree to limits to autonomy to make sure we can all have that. But yeah, the idea that there is a being that is beyond our understanding and also is absolutely correct about everything, and there is a one singular truth about things, there is no logical reason for that. We could concede that there might be a being that created us that's beyond us, and that being, from all the evidence of all the other beings that exist, look at the diversity, not just in humans but in every other species on the planet. There's, whether it's the color of sort of spots and stripes and things on the skin, or whether it's just like the mating habits or whatever it is, there's so much diversity out there. The idea that this being is and this is the correct one way of doing things, it's totally logically consistent to say there's this sort of ever-changing, sort of very fluid and flitty kind of being that has lots of different ideas, and threw a lot of those ideas out there and say, well, let's see what works, and everyone can contribute and chip in. And I haven't got any sort of authority over the absolute truth. I've got some ideas. We're all very creative as a species, as a universe. Things are creative, they experiment. So if there was a creator, it's more likely that it's also experimental, creative, and doesn't have one fixed attitude towards anything. And then, yeah, getting more to earth, the idea that even a small town, let alone a city or something like that. You know, I mean, you're at a university. Does your university all agree on the same things? No, and it shouldn't. The only way you can do that is through coercion. And this is that sort of anarchist point, that the idea of universal will is something that we have no evidence of it coming about, other than through some sort of coercive, you know, let's get rid of all of the people who disagree, or let's threaten people who disagree with some sort of sanction, or silence people who disagree with some sort of, whatever it is, you know. So we know that just from anything, you know. I once did a lesson with students about democracy and voting, which was they didn't realize it was a lesson. I actually said it was the end of term, and I said we're going to watch a film in the, you know, our last day of school. We're going to watch a movie, and I've brought in 10 films that we could watch. So let's decide what film we're going to watch. And you know, you can't get an agreement for 10 out of 10 films of one film that people want to watch. And we ended up spending, it was an hour-long lesson. We ended up spending 45 minutes choosing a final film that everyone could agree, by using various sort of proportional representation system of whittling down all the choices to the one. And we ended up with a final movie, which in the first round of voting, no majority had wanted, but it ended sort of majority once we got rid of some of the less likely contenders. And then we had to make some choices about things like the menu on the DVD that we had, like what language we're going to watch it in, which version of the film. So by the end of that 45 minutes, we were watching a film that originally only, I think it was sort of 3 out of 30 people in the class had wanted to watch in the first place. And we were watching it in Arabic, out of all the languages on selection, because that won the vote. Of which I think there was one student who actually spoke Arabic in the class. And we only had 15 minutes to watch a movie that was over an hour long. And it just kind of didn't work. And for me, it's a silly example, but it's like, yeah, if you can't all agree on just a movie to watch, if you can't agree on something even fundamental, like, you know, do not kill, feels so obvious until you start thinking about things like euthanasia and abortion, and when you know, what's killing, and or if it's war, am I allowed to kill, and what if someone's attacking me and I self-defense, and you know, suddenly do not kill is even no universality there. There's lots of gray areas and question marks. I just think, yeah, you can't get 100% unanimity unless you coerce it. And so I'd be against coercion. So I think, yeah, any universal will, God or human, is unnecessary and unlikely to happen in any sort of ethical way.
Okay. So it only took us 40 minutes to get to introducing you.
Sorry about that.
No. That's I really wanted to expand more on that. I have no problems at all. So we're gonna do an introduction now. Hello everyone. My name is Neo Harder, aka the Farm Boy. You have joined me on Farm Boy Meets the World. Today I'm going to be meeting DaN McKee. DaN McKee is a philosopher and a teacher based out of the UK. I would say, is a public intellectual, and that's one of the reasons why I'm very interested in him, because he has a lot to say, and I think that FBMW is a perfect platform for him to say it on. So, DaN, if you don't mind, do you think we can just take a few minutes to just kind of introduce yourself, kind of talk about who you are, and then I'll start asking you a few questions, stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like you said, I'm a teacher and a philosopher. So I was a guy who basically went to school, hated authority, and hated God, actually. And you know, I had lots of problems with the idea of this loving God and evil happening, and started asking those questions about, like, well, how can that happen? Which led teachers to say, you're doing a thing called philosophy. And a friend of mine discovered that this college near us did a course called philosophy, which was that word that the teachers had used. So we signed up to do that, and we wanted to get out of the school. So it allowed us to leave the school, go to this college, and study philosophy. And so I started doing philosophy at A level in the UK, which is sort of between the ages of 16 and 18. and loved it. And I started doing it thinking, I'm going to disprove God. That's my big philosophical thing. And within about a week of doing philosophy, I discovered ethics and political philosophy and realized, well, I already don't believe in God, so why am I wasting time with that? There's other things in the real world to focus on. So I started studying that. And, I was a bass player and singer in a punk band called Academy of Morticians. And we were very interested in politics, inspired by bands like Dead Kennedys and things like that. So I basically started studying politics to understand the lyrics for Dead Kennedys albums. So I kind of needed a context of 1980s American politics, which was interesting because my family's from America. My mom's from New York originally, and came to the UK to study Shakespeare, and met my dad studying Shakespeare, and that's why I exist. So another reason I don't like Shakespeare, I say on my more depressed days. But I love philosophy and went to study at university, philosophy and politics, and kind of just fell in love more with doing philosophy and political philosophy. And so I kind of started writing a dissertation about anarchism as an undergraduate, which I wanted to pursue, and applied for some funding to pursue that at master's level, but it was not given. And so I ended up getting a scholarship to do a master's on just war theory and the social contract, which was another interest of mine. But then I sort of combined those ideas of sort of social contract anarchism to do a PhD, which was funded by the government, the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council. The first time I applied for funding, I said the word anarchism a lot and they didn't fund it. This time I wrote basically the same application, but just said I will be examining structures of political power, and they gave me the funding. So yeah, I was funded by the government to research, do a PhD in it, which I did, and was planning to sort of go the academic route. But while I was doing the PhD, I started teaching some undergraduates and really loved that. And my wife was also a teacher. She's an English teacher. And I was more and more really enjoying talking to students and hating academic conferences and talking to academics, because students would come at problems really open-minded without the idea that there's a right answer to things. They'd really think things through for themselves. Whereas when you're a professional philosopher, you're supposed to have done all the reading. You're supposed to know what the literature says and basically parrot that out. And most of the literature is a sort of self-perpetuating industry of, we need to publish things, so we'll publish things and then you can publish a response to your article. And in terms of philosophy, that leads to a lot of navel gazing about language and words, rather than ever getting to the nitty-gritty. So I wanted to talk about democracy and anarchism and what's going on in the world, wars and things like that. And I'd go to conferences and talk about it, and people would sort of be like, well, what, when you say democracy, what exactly wording do you mean? Like, what kind of democracy? And I was like, that bit's not as interesting to me as we ought to do this. And well, when you say ought, David Hume said you can't get an ought from some is's, and why is all this facts about the world leading to ethics? And I just was losing my mind a bit, hearing these tired things and not ever getting to what I wanted to do, which was practical, real world application of ideas. And I talked to students and they weren't like that, they were great. So I knew I didn't want to go into academia, and I just kind of just had no plan really. My wife got a job in another town. I was coming to the end of the PhD, so I just was like, when I got the PhD, we'll do this teaching thing, and write a novel. That was my big plan, and figure things out. So I wrote some terrible unpublished horror novels, and tried to figure things out. And the thing I did was I missed the undergraduates I taught, and my wife would come home from her school every day talking about teaching, and I was like, that's the thing that I really miss. And this was around 2010 in the UK, when there was a general election coming up. And one of the things that I noticed was just how bad our public discourse was around the election, because all of the sound bites, all of the interviews, all of the debates were just so empty and just pure rhetoric. And yet people sort of fell for these fallacious arguments, these sort of empty slogans. And I was just like, we need to be better thinkers as a country. So I was like, I wish I could do philosophy stuff with children instead of like I was doing with undergraduates. Can I go into schools? We don't have a thing called philosophy in schools. And then I actually did some research, and it turned out since I'd been at school, we did now have a thing called philosophy in schools, because religious education is quite boring. And the sort of adaptation over time was, well, let's make it fun and exciting and call it philosophy and add some philosophy into it. And suddenly the numbers grew. So they were looking for lots of philosophy teachers to teach religious education. And I sort of, through a series of accidents of talking to friends who were teachers, were like, how do you train to be a teacher? Because even though my wife was, she trained in a different country because we live in Wales and they've got a different system than England. So I was sort of like, how do you do it? What's going on? And school near me wanted a trainee RE teacher, so I kind of jumped in, started doing that, and yeah, just fell in love with it. So I've been in the school system as a teacher, which I wrote this whole book, Anarchist Atheist Punk Rock Teacher, about the contradiction really of being someone who hates authority and hates school and hates God, now being the authority in a school as a teacher, going to school every day, even though, you know, by choice, and teaching about God. Which, you know, I've come to peace with in my life. And I kind of, it's generally around the principle of, if I'm not there offering whatever I offer to students, someone else would be there. So it may as well be someone that hopefully makes people think for themselves and come out of the system with some education, as opposed to just regurgitation of facts, which schools are usually about. So I kind of like, I'm quite explicit about it. You know, I subvert from the inside quite openly, and part of philosophy is talking about things and questioning and problematizing them. So for me, that includes the school. When I'm in school and, you know, talking to students, we ask questions about why school does certain things and what education really is, and, you know, do a lot of philosophy of education whilst also doing philosophy of other things. So yeah, that, and as well as that, I write philosophy. I run Philosophy Unleashed, the blog. I have written a book, Authentic Democracy, Justification of Anarchism. The book I told you about, the memoir about teaching, and sort of academic, you know, papers I've written about character education in school and why we shouldn't punish people in schools and things like that.
You know, you said a few things that automatically made my mind jump and draw parallels to a few other individuals that I've spoken to. I've only been doing this podcast now for, let me see, about 2 months. And with the people that I've spoken to, one common thing that I've heard is very similar to what you said, is that a lot of people want to make a really big difference in this world. There are a lot of, especially people that you find in academia, they really do want to make a massive impact on this world. They have the intellectual ability, they have the motivation, they even potentially have some of the resources, but it's very, very difficult when you live in basically a completely systematized society where in some aspects you really are just a number. And so what they've been telling me is that they feel the most empowered and capable to make a change when they're actually speaking to students, because that's when they're able to possibly affect the future and possibly affect the society at its core, not necessarily from what you could say the top down, but rather from the bottom up. And I could definitely see your approach and how it relates to a few other of the professors that I've spoken to.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and a lot of people hear that and think, you know, are these teachers trying to indoctrinate students with their own sort of political agendas and things? And that really bothers me for so many reasons, because if you've ever, you know, if you've ever taught a class of students, especially young students, like, you know, I teach between 11 years old to 18 primarily, you know, you can't indoctrinate these people with your views, because there's no one more sort of inquisitive and questioning and critical than a student at school, especially if their teacher says this is, you know, you can look at the world, all the problems in the world, teachers have spent time trying to tell people not to do. You know, don't go drink driving, don't get pregnant too young. People still do it, doesn't matter what your teachers say.
Actually, you're right. I didn't even, you're totally right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, even like learn how to do maths. I didn't bother. I was told that by my teachers. I ended up doing quite poorly in maths. You know, it doesn't matter how many times. If I can't get a student to do that, I'm not going to change their voting habits or their political beliefs. But what we do is we get to get them thinking and them bringing ideas and them fired up. And what you can offer in an educational environment is alternative ways of looking at things that isn't just the family's way. And that's what's really important, you know, and why we have collective education, because, you know, we're in a bubble at home, and I really like sort of homeschooling as well. There's lots of sort of the anarchist part of me, I can see a lot of good that comes from homeschooling movement, the unschooling movement, because schools are really bad places on some levels for all kinds of other reasons. So there's good arguments for taking people out of schools on some levels. But what's nice about them is bringing people from all these different walks of life together and letting people discover that like that way that we do things at home is not the only way of doing things. And on a sort of bigger picture level about your community, your society, your country, the world, realizing the way we currently do things is not the only way we could be doing things, and starting to think about that stuff and sort of go, oh wow. So, I mean, it's a stupid thing, but like something in America, I always remember I was in New York watching years ago Michael Moore's movie Sicko about the health, health provision in the United States and around the world. And there was a bit in that movie where they showed the UK system. And obviously I know the UK system. And I just remember the genuine shock in the theatre in New York of all these people seeing what happens in the UK in terms of the fact that things are free and we just go to the hospital and get treated and there's no bill. And, someone had a baby and they didn't have to pay anything for it. And people were genuinely shocked by that. And all that was like this thing that's happening a few thousand miles across an ocean from you, right? But if you hadn't ever been exposed to it, then you don't know. And same from people here. There's stuff the American healthcare system does better than the NHS, because although it's free and there's lots of good stuff, there's stuff that in America, because it's got all this money in it, there's maybe better quality of some things than we have. There's certainly medicines available there that we don't have here. And it's important that we discover stuff about other people and other places and realize that there's different ways of doing things. And school's like a small version of that. My family always eat this on a Friday for dinner, and then you go to school and realize like, but no one else's family does. Or like the food I eat is different than the food they eat, or the hobbies we have, the just norms of our life. And teachers are part of that conversation. You meet all these series of adults who aren't your parents, who are different from your parents and have different views about the world. And I've always said, if your parents invite random friends to the house, and you're coming to contact with all these different people in your own families as well, who have no laws that stop them from telling you their political views or their views about life. And I think what's really important is we hear everyone's views and we have those conversations and we get exposed to loads of stuff and we make our own minds up. And that's the big thing, I think, in education. We've got like the mantle of that's what we're doing. We're getting people to think, we're getting people to have. So you might not realize it when you're at home, or if you're, at a restaurant with some friends or something, and you're talking about stuff, because your headspace is not in that. And I'm really reflecting on it, and I'm thinking about stuff. But when it's in a classroom, that's the activity that you're focusing on. We're thinking about this stuff. So when you're presented with some alternatives, you might think about it and go, and actually I need to think differently about that, or that one idea that you were presented might just stick with you. But yeah, it does, it's no guarantee, but I think we do have more chance of doing that in a classroom and getting people thinking. And also teaching, like I've had my mind changed so many times by students who, they do bounce back and they give you ideas and they tell you why you're wrong, and that's great too. Like we all get to have these conversations and share our sort of prejudices and intuitions and kick them about a bit and see what we think at the end of that. And I think it's a really kind of rewarding thing to do, even if most of the time it doesn't work. I always think there's a really great philosophy student I had once who went off to Oxford University to study philosophy, and I was like, yeah, he's going to be a famous philosopher one day. And he came to see me when he left. He's like, yeah, you're going to hate me, but I'm getting a career in high finance, and now he's a banker somewhere. So like, it doesn't always work. You can't indoctrinate people the way people think we can. And but for everyone like that, there will be, and I know there are, students get in touch with me, there are people who some weird throwaway comment that I said has made them think differently about something, has changed their life in some way, probably not in the way you've ever intended, but it happens all the time.
Right. There's a few things that you said that I wanted to address really quick. I definitely want to move into anarchy, and what I want to ensure that I don't make any assumptions about my viewers, and I want everyone to before we move on with more of your beliefs about anarchy, kind of define what that is really. But before we get to that, if you don't mind, I just wanted to touch a little bit about the philosophical and I guess you could say, I would say the philosophical nature that school inherently has or should have when you go. And the ideal behind school, at least in the nature of education, is to question what is around you, is to, for one, take in information that has been questioned by others and has been proven to be correct, but then allow you to further expand and question that. One thing that I can definitely see may be of concern to some people is that you're basically, in so many words, rearing a generation of rebels, essentially, in some senses. But what I think is interesting is that people would only, I don't think people would rebel just by nature of being inquisitive. There has to be some sort of failure in government, or there has to be some sort of, or some sort of, other external influence that provokes those people with that have questioning, that have a questioning mindset into rebellion. And so I think in that sense, it would, the next question would be, okay, well, if the government fears that people would be rebellious because of their questioning mindset and their philosophical nature of school, then what is it exactly that the government is truly fearing? Is it the students, or is it their own failure to provide for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think there's a lot of sort of assumptions in there as well. I think for me, it's always about scrutiny, and John Stuart Mill, the philosopher, talks a lot about liberty and free speech and all that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I think he's always had the idea that if your ideas are good, they can be scrutinized as much as they want to be, and they'll withstand the scrutiny. If they don't withstand the scrutiny, then that's good too, because you get to reject your bad ideas. So
Right.
the questioning and inquisitiveness doesn't guarantee rebellion, like you say, because in theory, if everything's working, if everything's good, we question, we problematize, and we discover this is pretty good, right?
Hmm.
So like that should be the case. So I talked earlier about religion. In my classroom, we scrutinize every religious belief, every non-religious belief. My job is essentially to play devil's advocate to any position that a student presents. And in my time as a teacher, I've had students like lose their faith, get faith, change religion. I've been accused by parents of trying to promote atheism, trying to promote Islam, trying to promote Christianity, trying to promote Buddhism, Sikhism, everything but Hinduism for some reason. I've been told I was trying to promote, which to me is a sign I'm doing a good job, because I'm not trying to promote any of them, right? They're students are just changing their minds and thinking. But what it shows is, there are students who go to that, who have their religious views or their philosophical views or their political views, whatever it is we're discussing. And many of them will go through a criticism of them and keep them, and have arguments against anything that comes up in the classroom. And in their mind, they've got good beliefs, and that's the whole point. And I've always said, I want someone to leave my classroom. It doesn't matter what you are when you leave the classroom, but I want you to be able to say that you know why you are what you are, and you can defend it. So, I don't care if you leave an atheist, a theist, whatever political view you've got, any of that stuff. But what I don't want is a student to be, I'm this because I was just born that, I was raised that way. I've never really thought about it. It's what my parents do. It's what my neighbors do. I want them to be able to say, well, yeah, I believe this, and I've got an answer to that question, that people might ask about this position and things like that. So I think, yeah, Mill's right that scrutiny is something no one should fear. Whenever I do a talk on anarchism, there's always a Q&A. I don't go and just say, and I talk at schools about anarchism, and I never go to sell anarchism to the students. I go to really hear their questions and sort of respond to them. And again, a lot of them make me think and go, oh yeah, I've got to reassess some of my own beliefs. But in terms of the government fearing, I think one of the great things about schools for government, and one of the bad things about schools for us as people, is that because schools are connected to the state as a mechanism for jobs, basically we need qualifications to get jobs.
Right.
What that does is it actually changes the purpose. So the purpose of schools is not education. The purpose of schools is to get qualifications so you can get a job.
Right. Right.
Do that through like a pretend, like a theater of education. So you've got to learn things, and we might start a course by going like, let's have a little question about your views and think about some stuff. but now stop thinking, because here's the content you need for the exam. And certainly in the UK, where we have standardized exams at the age of 16 and 18, as well as university. So from the ages of 14 to 16, students are learning stuff so they can pass an exam at the age of 16. From the age of 16, they're learning stuff so they can pass the exam at the age of 18. And what that means is it changes a student's view of what learning is, because learning isn't exploring things, asking questions. Learning is making sure they can jump through the hoops for the exam boards to pass an exam, that they have the correct content, that they have the correct way of presenting ideas. And therefore, that switches off the part of the brain that's interested in going on tangents, but for perfectly legitimate reasons, because I don't want to waste time exploring something if it means that come the day of the exam, I don't know something I needed for that paper. So everything gets funneled into it's only important if it's going to lead to a qualification, including then university. People don't go, university costs a lot of money. People don't go to university unless they can see that translating into better employment later on. So even at university, like the professional academics, they get to spend a lot of time thinking these things through, but they mainly talk to themselves. A lot of the time they don't even teach students. They farm that out to postgraduates, like I was when I was at university teaching undergraduates when I was doing my PhD. Some of them do, not all of them, but a lot of what their job is to talk to other academics in journals that maybe 6 people will ever read the article in. So they explore stuff in a kind of insular world that doesn't actually impact on the real world. And most of the students going to university have gone through a system that's told them education is about passing exams and making money at the end of it. So the actual idea that we go to learn stuff because learning is just interesting. We go to think about stuff because it might enrich our lives. We go because maybe we don't have all the answers and we need to figure some stuff out. And maybe a 9-year-old in a school classroom could come up with an idea that is better than something we've done for generations. That stuff doesn't come into it because the real function of school is to kind of funnel that inquisitive nature into something instrumental towards getting employment at the end of it. And in a way I won't say kill it, that's a bit extreme, but to tame it and to give it get it incentivized so that, you're going to spend the most time learning the things that are going to lead to a personal reward rather than a social reward or just a sort of the intrinsic goodness of learning something. So I think that's why governments allow schools to happen, because they're actually a place where the thinking gets kind of neutered and mollified. So it's a safe place for people to kind of have the illusion of being able to talk about things. And that's why there's lots of rules and laws about teachers who maybe cross lines and do things. And it's like, they said that in the classroom and that made our child think about something, and that's a terrible crime, because actually we want people to sort of replicate the norms of society, socialize, and if they do kind of question them in a way that by the end of the time in school they'll have kind of grown up and learned the sensible answers to those questions. So even when you get to university and you're very sort of ready to learn big things, that's still happening, but in the back of your mind it's like, and I need to get a job at the end of it. I don't want to jeopardize my future, and it's a huge burden. If you mess this up, you won't get a job and you'll have wasted years and wasted all this money. And so it's doomed to fail if it was proper education, but it's doomed to succeed if it's designed to get people to kind of learn enough to make them feel like they're critical but not actually impactful in their criticism.
I see. Oh man, that really hit me hard, because it's been a lot. These are what you've just said has been relates to a lot of the things that I've been thinking about myself when I see other students here, and even when I have hard conversations with some of my friends that are in the STEM field, and I tell them, look, man, I'm a man of letters. I'm a global studies and a history major. My job is to study the world and to study history. That's what I'm doing, and it actually doesn't relate to my career path at all, really. Actually I had this realization to some degree, not as profound as you described it, but to some degree I had a realization when I was entering college that I really was essentially, if I took the typical STEM route, which I think I'm intellectually capable of, that's not an issue, then I would be essentially funneling my interests, and I would be essentially just another input to the what I would basically say the corporate system, really. And that's what I talk to some of my friends about when they're in STEM, and they're kind of like, why are you a history major? I'm like, do you really know why you're a STEM major? Do you do you realize that you are literally you're literally being pushed away from critical thought of history and pushed critical thought of the world, and you're literally being programmed to be an input to some sort of STEM related field. And a lot of people, a lot of my friends, then once they start to think about it, they say, "Oh wow, you're actually right. I basically am being programmed." But then they say, "I don't know what to do though. I'm 3 years in. The only way I can be successful. I've already spent all of this money on my classes. The only way I can be successful in this world is to make some money, stuff like that, and then maybe go out with that money and then start exploring." So what do you say to those students who feel like, maybe they realize that they are in the wrong field of study, they're very far in, and they essentially don't know what to do?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it is worth pointing out, there is a concerted effort to get people into STEM from, governments for generations, because governments can see the economic advantage of having the best scientists and technicians and engineers and stuff in their country, bringing brilliant innovations to their, economy. And so I know in the UK and in America, there's been loads invested in promoting it in schools, doing loads of competitions and making sure there's great teachers and that STEM is constantly talked about, and the financial benefits of a career in STEM. And even, we've always had this history of where there's needs in the workforce, there are incentives put into education and training in those things. And
Of
STEM's
course.
an example where loads of students have gone through their schools basically being told, like, this stuff is going to be making you a millionaire, a billionaire in the future. This is where it's at right now. This is the most important thing. And they're being told that because someone has come up with a strategy for their economy in the country that says that's what we need. We don't need philosophers. We don't need historians. We don't need, writers. We need scientists, technology, engineering, maths, that sort of thing. So they have been programmed, but that is not to say some of them don't actually love it. That's the problem, is like the programming is there, but some people would have gone into STEM anyway. But
Right.
what you can see is so many people don't love, so they don't go into science because they love science. They're going into it for some job-based thing at the end. They're not going to do biology to be a biologist. They're doing biology to go into some sort of maybe pharmaceutical thing or something like that at the end. Um, they don't do physics to do physics, they do physics to do engineering or something like that. So that sort of is on them. And I think everyone has to separate, just because there's been a lot of money put into promoting something to you doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong for you if it is truly the thing that you love, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, you can imagine, every movie's got a big budget to promote it, and some of them succeed, some of them flop. But if I see a movie that billions of dollars went into telling me to watch, and I genuinely enjoy that movie, I still enjoy that movie. I would enjoy that movie even if I accidentally saw it and no one had talked about it because it was a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
So that money and that programming is there doesn't necessarily mean they shouldn't be doing it. But if they know that they shouldn't be, if in their heart they don't enjoy it, they're not interested, but they are doing it for that paycheck at the end of it, the only thing you can really do is talk about, what is the point of life, and are you going to want to live a life? If you don't like your course, if you don't like studying it, if it's a chore, why are you setting yourself up for a life of nothing more than that thing that you already don't like? And for me, that was always stark. When I went to university in my first year, I was sitting in the kitchen of the halls of residence where I was living, and an ambulance pulled up, and they carried out a body from one of the adjacent halls. And there was a guy who was a first year medical student who had killed himself. And he left a suicide note to his family that said, essentially, I used the training in medicine that I've had on this course I never wanted to do, that you guys pushed me into doing, to learn exactly how much of a certain thing to take to kill myself. There's your medical. And it always got me like, why didn't this guy just quit? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you were prepared to kill yourself, why didn't you just like leave? Yes, it's a lot of expectation and debt and all that stuff, but you know, you should never get to that point where you have been forced into a life that's so unbearable that you want to take your own life because of it, just because other people around you are saying this is what you should do. So my advice to anyone who's stuck in any kind of situation like that where they don't really want to be doing it is like, it doesn't matter how much you put in. There's a logical fallacy called like the sunk costs fallacy, which is the idea that because I put all this money in and all this time in, it would be crazy to pull out of it now.
Right.
I'm going to put more time and money and energy, you know, and it's just a fallacy. Like, realize you've wasted 2 or 3 years, and that's fine. People waste 2 3 years all the time. People do jobs that are the wrong job and relationships are the wrong relationship. 2 or 3 years of a life is nothing. Quit the course and find the thing that makes you happy. Do something that is going to bring you fulfillment, or like do the thing that's not going to bring you fulfillment, but have something that gives you fulfillment. You know, your job might not be the source of your joy in life. The job might be the thing that pays the bills so you can do the thing you love. You know, I've got a friend who's a writer. He doesn't make a lot of money writing novels, but it's what he loves. So he has a day job part-time that, you know, pays the bills so he can write novels. So he's not going to quit that job and go, oh, it doesn't bring me joy, because the job doesn't bring you joy, but it brings you the means to do the thing that brings you joy. So my advice would always be like, yeah, if you feel that you've been pushed into a position, and you're doing something you don't want to do that's making you miserable, like don't do it. At the same time, recognize that the world is full of, you know, I've said in this whole interview that I don't think schools are very good places, but it's where I work. I try and sort of work within the cracks of that system, do something to subvert that a bit, and it's not perfect, and I just make peace with that fact that it's not perfect. And so you might go, well, I, you know, of all the shitty jobs out there that I don't want to do, I've got to do some shitty job, so I'll do the one that I'm trained for, but like that's not who I am, that's not the sum total of my life, so it doesn't really matter. So yeah, it depends the level of desperation. If you're just like, well, you know, it was either STEM or history and I didn't really care, and I don't care what I do, I just got to do something, then, you know, keep going with the STEM. But if the STEM's making you miserable, then I would definitely say, you know, leave. Don't worry. We've all got wasted things. We've all got regrets. Just, you know, get on with doing something better tomorrow.
I understand. So if you are a student who finds themselves far into their academic career but is truly disliking it, it may be a reflective point and it may be honestly the perfect opportunity for you to change your career path before you dedicate to something that you may not enjoy at all throughout the rest of your life. And also, it's a perfect point for you to reflect and truly determine whether or not that is something for you, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. And then also what you're trying to say is weigh your options and weigh whether or not, you really can essentially sacrifice a certain portion of your life to earn enough money, but then reserve the rest of your time to do what you truly love. And what's really interesting is I I can see the continuity in all of the things that you're talking about because at the core of what you're saying, a lot of it has to do with that anarchism, essentially, that not that anti-deference to just what is the expectation, and maybe even anarchy to a certain extent where the entire government may not be able to be abolished and all of our social systems may not be able to be abolished, but you as an individual can be an anarchist to a certain extent in your time away from the systems, right? And so I guess the best thing that we could do now is just so that we can make this a little bit more comprehensible from people moving forward and kind of demystify some of the connotation is, can you just describe what is anarchism from your perspective and kind of maybe how it relates to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about?
Yeah, so anarchism, and it's a really good question, like from my perspective, because what I would say anarchism is might not be what other anarchists say,
Right.
because that, you know, there's a lot of diversity in every viewpoint. But as we said earlier, no universal will. But anarchism is designed to this idea of individual autonomy and stuff like that. So it's even harder to find a kind of agreement on what anarchism has to be. And as soon as you start saying it is this and it must be that, you kind of
Mm.
stop anarchist. So for me, it is a belief that basically we shouldn't um, government. And by government, it could be any kind of hierarchical power and authority over you. But it's not sort of selfish individualism, because you can give authority to anyone you want to. You know, you're free to do that. So my version of it isn't just like chaos. It's not, there shouldn't be laws, there shouldn't be governments, we should do whatever we want. It's saying that once you have a permanent entrenched power structure that's hierarchical, with some people on top, some people on the bottom, you don't really have legitimacy for that. You've just got coercion, you've got power, you've got control. And a better way of doing things would be to acknowledge that we can work together cooperatively, freely, choose when to limit our freedoms for, you know, collective endeavors that we think is worth doing. So I mean, I use the classroom as an example. I can stand as the teacher and say everyone needs to shut up or I'm going to put you in detention, right? Or we can just recognize that in this class we all want to take the class. This person, the teacher, maybe knows something that's worth hearing, and so we choose to silence ourselves to listen to that teacher for a limited time, right? So one is the coercive model, the sort of power model, and one is the model that says you get the same results, but we're all choosing to do it. And it's not oppressive, it's not awful to say you had to be silent to listen to someone talk for half an hour or whatever. It's saying you recognize there was a reason to do it and you chose to do it in that moment. And you can take that in a broader way in, you know, society, and you could say, people say like, well, who would clean the sewers and how would there be food and all the things, you know, government runs all that stuff and society needs, and you can still do all of that stuff. You just don't need to do it from this idea of centralized government control where there is this power structure that's sort of entrenched and always there. We can decide we want some power structures that are there to organize things, that run things, but it's about choosing to do it. And that could actually take the model of something that seems pretty permanent and entrenched. But the difference would be in anarchism that it's always a voluntary choice, and you could always remove that authority if it no longer serves its purpose. In a way that, say, we pretend to do in our democracies, with the idea of where you always can re-elect and vote in 4 years, 5 years, depending on the government, depending on the country. But for me, those systems are pantomime systems that don't really ever get rid of the power, because the entrenched power is there, and it's this hierarchical. The very idea of like voting for a prime minister or a president is not the same thing as voting, say, in your own small constituency or small community, for someone or some group of people to do a job that you all believe, you know, should be done, ought to be done, and want to be done. Basically, our current system is intentionally unmanageable. So, you know, a representative, by being a representative of hundreds, thousands of people, maybe millions of people, depending on who the representative is, has to be able to say, well, I can't possibly, you know, do listen to everyone and talk to everyone.
Right.
And it's in the question, so why don't we change the system so representatives could? Why don't we make it so it's smaller systems that are federated rather than this big central government thing? Why don't we make it more voluntary, temporary, instead of entrenched terms and things like that? We just sort of stick with that system and say this is the case. So my book, Authentic Democracy, basically makes the case that the ethical arguments for why we have any kind of government in the first place, whatever the system, is based on a sort of social contract, understanding that all humans have their own autonomy over themselves, and we voluntarily choose to give that up to achieve some sort of end in society, so make life better for people in some way. And what we call democracy is kind of the best way of doing that, we've decided. But my argument is that true democracy, the thing that we think we have, the thing that we think we want, the thing that our current arguments that justify our current system justify, should actually be a form of anarchism, not the democracies we have, which is like a bastardized version where it's got all the rhetoric of autonomy and the people, and, you know, you get to choose all this stuff, but in practice we're not informed, we don't know what's going on, we've outsourced most of the things to other people at the top of hierarchies, who then kind of create these self-perpetuating systems, really, that keep us distracted and doing things that are a waste of our lives a lot of the time. there's a big combination of economics and politics, because most of what we do is to keep up an economic system that's not really fit for purpose. It's fit for making profit for certain people, groups of, you know, rich people, but not just rich people, just people who are benefiting from the current system. It doesn't have to be that they're super wealthy. It could just be, well, I'm all right. I've got a house. I can pay the bills. So everything's fine. But the idea that we could get rid of that whole system, like my anarchism has no money because everything exists. All resources are there. We don't need to put prices on them. We've just chosen to do that for distribution reasons. And we could choose to distribute them in a different way. So my anarchism is sort of a world with no hierarchies, a different economy that's not about money, that's about resources being there when we need them, and lots of mutual aid and cooperation. And I say all of that with the caveat that I know that my anarchism would be impossible in my lifetime.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So I was going to ask you a few clarifying questions, and I wanted to synthesize a little bit, but go ahead. That's exactly where I was going. Is it even possible to do this?
Yeah, so I definitely, there's two things. I think it is possible. I don't think it's possible now. I think for all kinds of reasons, and school being one of them, we are ideologically trained to this current system. We've kind of got a learned helplessness, and we're quite comfortable relatively in loads of different ways. So to motivate us to see that there's a better way possible, to motivate us out of our ways of thinking that are about property, are about jobs that are careers that we have to do to earn an income over a lifetime and pay the bills, to think about resources in a way where but I can't trust that people would just share stuff. We have been corrupted by our current system into a particular way of living that I think, for all the reasons of inequality and mass sort of social problems and things that are caused by this system that doesn't serve everybody, we should, and we have an ethical obligation to change. But it's not going to change overnight, and it can't change overnight for several reasons. One, because as we said earlier, we can't have universal will without coercion, and anarchism's against coercion. So no anarchist, in my mind, who is worth their salt, would want like a violent revolution or a sort of, we're going to have anarchy now because we must, because it's the right thing to do, so you have to stop what you're doing. It has to come from autonomously choosing to have it, and that can't be done quickly, and that can't be done without coercion unless people come to those ideas and discover them and develop them and choose them. And that will take generations. It just can't happen. Even if someone wrote a really great book or pamphlet or YouTube video and here's anarchism, and everyone likes it, everyone won't choose to do it, and there's so many entrenched things to change. But what you can do in our generation is small things to open people's eyes to alternatives. Just asking questions. Does that person who's in charge need to be in charge? Would this job happen if there wasn't a boss? And if there wasn't a boss and the job wouldn't happen, should this job exist, right? If no one would be willing to do it unless we were coerced to do it, why are we doing it? Well, if we're doing it just because we need to pay the bills, well, why have we got a system like that where we're doing pointless work, bullshit jobs, as David Graeber says, to pay bills that we don't need to pay? Why do we pay bills? That's another question. Like, why are these things that exist owned by certain people, companies, and if they're important, we should share them. And why do I need to buy them? Because if they're important and people don't have them and people are dying because they can't feed themselves or they freeze to death because they haven't got heat or whatever the thing is that they don't have, why is that happening? Well, it doesn't need to. There was never anyone who died of starvation in a world who needed to die, because we've always had the food. It's always been there, right? But we've got this system that means they couldn't have it because it was our food, so we didn't ship it to that country or we didn't give it to that neighbor. And why? So just asking those questions and showing alternatives, doing things like going, I just gave some food to someone who needed it. I didn't do a charity thing because I wanted to go to heaven. I didn't do a charity thing because someone did a benefit gig and I went to the gig. I just gave the charity because I thought it was the right thing to do. Those examples, those moments now where you can become, there's a guy called James Scott, I think he's called, he talks about anarchist calisthenics. And, we do little exercises of anarchism every day to keep ourselves trim for the revolution, but also to inspire people. for that revolution. So, you know, the teacher doesn't turn up. What do? Well, teach yourself, right? You don't need the teacher. The boss doesn't show up. Is the job worth doing? The government is failing in some way. Do we wait for them to succeed? Do we vote them out? Or do we just as a community come together and solve the problem and sort of sidestep the government?
So I see. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All of that stuff is kind of like these little ways that the more we do that, the more people might question and come to those conclusions that maybe we don't need the teacher, the boss, the government ever, and we can do all that stuff ourselves. And if we do, because I do believe in things like teachers maybe having some wisdom of some topic areas that their students don't have, but only to an extent, right? So I think it needs to be a mutual and shared kind of power that's like, we call it horizontal instead of hierarchical. You know, everyone's got shared power, and I might, as the guy with the PhD in philosophy, start something off about philosophy, but someone who's got no qualification in philosophy might have the power next because they've got something interesting to say anyway, right? The PhD doesn't really mean anything. So once you do that, you know, the hope is slowly people realize these are better ways of doing things and gradually change over time. But, you know, for me, I'm a bit pessimistic. I'd love that to be the future, but I don't believe, as I said earlier, in there being a God or a purpose or any kind of plan to the world. So we've kind of got to choose it or not choose it. And more and more, it seems we don't choose it, despite the good examples that are out there. And so there's nothing you can do to coerce that choice. You've just got to hope. And so I guess in a way, that's my spiritualism, is hoping that the future might be better for future generations eventually. And in the meantime, we can do what we can in the small cracks between where we're free to do stuff.
I see. So you essentially believe that there is no legitimacy to a hierarchical power unless it's operating on an ethical basis. And for it to operate on an ethical basis, it can't employ coercion, and it can't employ tactics that would force people into following it, like some sort of universal will, essentially. So just by that nature, government inherently is unethical at the way it stands as it is now. And so what my question is there, okay, is there, for one, levels of anarchy to where, I suppose, okay, let me just clarify. There are some institutions that may not need to be hierarchical, for example, like financial institutions in the United States, I would say, just because it's where I'm from, you know. They're not necessarily claiming some sort of hierarchy, but they do have a purpose and function in distributing and giving people capital and things like that, and just enabling people to move forward and actually, in some ways, be an individual because they have access to capital and stuff like that. So do you think that there's any validity in institutions that are established and or have a function in society but aren't necessarily hierarchical? Or does their supposed assumption that they are established make them hierarchical by nature? Well, I'm kind of jumbled here.
No, I think I know what you mean. Like, basically, would there be any place for institutions? And again, I think it's a different kind of institution. You could say so. I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel on things that we think are working. It's the things that don't work. And I would say, like, financial institutions in the current system help some people in that system. But if that financial system went away, and we had a better alternative, we wouldn't necessarily need those institutions. So in anarchism, the idea would be you'd establish things that you need. So let's imagine there's a lot of talk in anarchism about sort of mutual aid organizations. So, you know, during the pandemic, when people couldn't necessarily leave their homes and get groceries and things like that, lots of like neighborhood mutual aid things happened where, without anyone telling them to, you know, the neighborhood got together and was like, well, so and so is an elderly person who lives on that street, like, we're going to get them food, and we'll talk to them, we'll bring groceries to them, you know, however they need it. And it's not organized, there's not an institution, but you can imagine that we as a society go, that's a good idea. Actually, there's lots of people who need help, who we could collectively kind of choose to just help. So let's like set that up kind of formally and make sure it's always there for people who need it. But the difference with the anarchism thing would be, in setting up formally might just be making sure that we have that in place, right? because we recognize the need for it. And it might be that we just live at a time where for some reason, for a few months, a few years, no one needs it, right? So it wouldn't have to still be there and pay the bills and, have a setup as an institution. But we know that this is this thing we can do when it's needed, and it picks up and it drops down as and when. So as an institution, it doesn't need to be sort of always there. But as an idea, that it could be an institution, and maybe if it was always needed, it could be there. But again, it's that idea of the power being temporary. So we might say someone needs to organize this thing, right? We can't just have like, hopefully we'll all figure out when someone needs our help. Maybe we should have like, I don't know, a phone line that someone should man and make sure that if anyone needs help, they can call that number. So we might say, yeah, you know what? We'll all agree that that's a good thing, and we'll all give up a couple of hours a month to be on call, right? But no one's making us do this. We just choose to do this because this is what we want. So in a way, there's an institution. It's always there. The mutual aid group is there, waiting if someone needs them. But they may not actually exist. They might just be a kind of shared responsibility that can jump into action when needed. And no one's necessarily in charge. But we might say, like, I don't understand rotas. Like, can you be in charge of making the rota? And we'll do whatever you say. But we're giving that autonomy away freely and voluntarily, and for a reason that we agree to.
Yeah.
So the institutions would be different. So like a university, schools are things that would probably still exist, but they would maybe take a very different form. But if we all agree, we think people should be educated, and it would be good to do it collectively, and it'd be good to do it in a particular place, there's no reason that that place couldn't be maintained and that be an institution. But it would be something that we are always talking about and is always evolving and is a kind of fluid institution rather than a fixed one.
I see. Yeah. So I'm just synthesizing here. It's essentially, as we shouldn't pay our legislators in the government to essentially, because, okay, so let me preempt it actually and say part of your idea is that anarchism is about not necessarily eliminating all institutions, but creating institutions as they're needed, and creating institutions for the specific problem, giving people the authority who should have the authority, who have proven that, who have given their salt basically, to run those institutions. And then once the need for the institution is no longer present, it should be reevaluated. And then I guess the thing that I was preempting was we shouldn't essentially pay people to create problems either. And that's what I see a lot of. You see a lot of government officials being essentially paid to create a problem, and then they solve the problem, but it's a perpetuating cycle. So how do you feel about that?
No, absolutely. So that's one of the problems. When things are permanent, there becomes in the background of any good it does a kind of, and we need to maintain our own existence thing. So it's never like a pure institution for the good of the institution. There's always some element of it. So you could think we talked about, the possibility that maybe qualifications corrupt education, but that's why people pay all that money to go to university, right? They want the qualification, they want those degrees, so they can get those jobs. And by doing that, it's enabled the universities to survive. So academics can still do academic work that otherwise maybe society doesn't value. We don't really value academia, but we value jobs that have high paying wages. So we allow the university to exist, and the university's found a way of paying its way by doing that on the side, right? Producing. And that's the corruption. So if we didn't need that, and we recognized, hang on, a lot of what this thing is doing is this thing that we don't need or that we don't want, and we'd much rather it was doing that thing, we can get rid of the corrupting influence. So if those financial institutions, yes, they do help people, like you say, who don't maybe have access to some money, they help them become autonomous by giving them that financial aid. But that's only because we have a financial system that you need money to be able to be autonomous in. So part of their job is to keep that economic arrangement going, because that's how they get the money that they can then give to people. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. So if they were really there to solve the problem, and it was like, well, this person, I don't know, can't start their business or whatever, well, we can ask the question, like, do they need to start a business? Why do they need to start a business? Well, actually, all they want to do is be able to eat. That's the real thing they want here. They want to be able to eat. They want to be able to feed their family. They want to have a roof over their heads. So do they even want to do this business? I mean, we talked about STEM earlier. So many people, not just people studying STEM subjects, are doing jobs, careers, things that they have no interest in, but they have to do. They will be homeless without it. They will be starving without it. And you can look at that and go, is that the point of life? Just to be able to spend most of your time working so you can pay the bill, to continue having the means to sleep somewhere so you can wake up and continue to work the next day in the job that you don't like, so you can pay the bills to keep that lifestyle going until you die. And you could look at that and say, that's probably not the best model of life that we've got. And for most people, that is the model of life. So part of anarchism is about thinking about that. Like, what would a really good life be? What is it we actually want? What are we getting that money for? And thinking about, rather than getting money so you can obtain the thing, going straight to the thing and going, how do we get that thing to people straight away? And if money's the obstacle rather than the means, because it's only a means because we've got the economy there, get rid of that economy and create the thing itself. It might be freedom. I want money so I can be my own boss and choose what I do. I want money so I can travel. I want money so I can raise a family. Whatever it is, the thing at the end of it is the thing we should really be focusing on, rather than the means to that end within a current flawed and problematic system. So yeah, so that's sort of the anarchist answer, is looking beyond the current frameworks and looking to a better world that could be, and then figuring out how to get that instead.
I understand. Now, okay, I want to move into a little bit of practical application of some of the stuff we're talking about now. But before we do that, I hope you don't mind. I just want to, I need to take a restroom break, and I need to talk to the technical guy that I'm working with here. Just get some stuff, tidy up some stuff, and then I'll be back in maybe 5 minutes. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, should I just wait here, or do I?
Yeah, actually, I think honestly, as long as you don't mind just waiting for a few minutes, then
Yeah,
there's no issue. There's no issue.
it's fine. I'll just wait here.
Okay, yeah, I'll be right back. I'm sorry about that.
Right.
5 minutes later.
Okay, so I guess what I want to know is, obviously this is uh all hypothetical, and you've already established that it's in order for an anarchical system to truly take form, in the essence of anarchy, it can't be coerced, and it can't be some sort of, like forceful revolution in any capacity, right? So what can we do now with, and obviously we already spoke about like thinking and being questioning and stuff, but what can we do now with our, in the United States, for example, with our current form of government that would be closer to the anarchical model? Like, maybe this is let me just give you some things that I'm thinking, and then you give me what you think. I'm thinking stuff like, maybe legislators, for example, who are paid to do legislation for a fraction of the year, right? Maybe it's not good for these legislators to be active politicians, basically, on the campaign trail throughout the rest of the year. Maybe what they should be doing is, or maybe there should be more reception during the non-legislative portion, rather than just spewing out an agenda the entire time and then going to the legislature and then forcing that agenda, stuff like that. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I always think of something Noam Chomsky said years and years ago, which has always stuck with me. If it was a real democracy, we would be talking to our representatives, our legislators, and saying what we want, what we think, and they'd be taking that, rather than them coming with a platform or an agenda to us and telling us, this is what you should be voting for, this is what we want. And I think that simple flip is an immediate change that would make things very different, rather than having, in our country, our politicians have their various sort of manifestos they write for their elections, and they have their platform that this is what we're going to be voting on in the next election. And they should be asking us what we want, not telling us what they're going to do. And that flip certainly would make things different. But I do think it's a false, anything we do through the current system will never really get us to anarchism. But what it would do, and my theory, I've always called it the tone of our oppression. If you accept that whatever system we've got is fundamentally oppressive because it's not the system we should have, You can either go two ways. You can go one way and you can sort of do this, I'll throw my hands up and it's all terrible and they're all as bad as each other and, you know, who cares? It doesn't matter. Or you can recognize that, like, even though, you know, say in the US election, you know, Trump or Biden, none of these people are going to be the heroes that are going to bring us anarchism. But you can definitely look at that and you can say, you know what? A Biden government would be better for us than a Trump government in terms of the tone of our oppression. And by the tone of our oppression, I mean, what does Trump bring us? Trump brings us the language of division, this sort of nasty, selfish, you know, he could say America first, he could say Republicans first, but it's basically my team versus your team, and I hate your team, and I'm going to do what I can to screw you over. Whereas Biden, whatever you think about his politics, the language, the tone of that is a language of inclusivity, a language of trying to do things through democratic processes. And even if it's rhetoric, even if it's lies, right? In that, you know, and by this I don't mean that he's lying about doing it that way, but when we talk about the greatness of democracy, maybe we don't believe it's that great, you know, whatever, because we're anarchists and we think that the whole system is corrupt. You're forced to speak in that tone because that's how you've publicly platformed, which means the tone of your government and the tone of the things that you do is just better. And so it doesn't have to be Biden, Trump, or in my country, Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak. You've got right and left is ultimately, for me, a battle of tone, with the right tending to be the tone of fuck everybody else, right? Except for us and our people. And whatever our people are, right? Because it can be broad, it can be short, it can be inclusive, but it's usually kind of a version of, you know, the world's tough and you've got to kind of be by yourself and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And, you know, also we probably have some groups that we don't like. Whereas the left, and again, you know, it doesn't matter kind of what version of left we're talking about. The rhetoric of the left is we're trying to make sure everyone gets a fair shake. We're trying to make sure that people are not discriminated against. We're trying to make the world more inclusive for people. And that's the rhetoric. Now, you might not believe the rhetoric, but the rhetoric is important because in a world where whatever we have is oppressive, the rhetoric sets the stage of the sort of world that we get to live in. So do we choose a world where the tone of that world is divisive, us against them, screw everyone else and just look after your own small group of people? Or do you live in a world where the rhetoric is, we need to help as many people as possible. We need to be caring about each other. We can't just abandon people and discriminate against people and shut people away from things. And yeah, no one lives up to their rhetoric. You know, they end up fighting wars that shouldn't have been fought and still banning certain types of immigration that they said that they wouldn't, and, you know, still discriminating against people. But we can actually hold them to account. And there's an argument there that says, well, that's not the world that you said that we would have. You've argued this sort of grand principle and we can hold you to account on that principle. Whereas I think on the right, the grand principle is usually not a good principle that they're arguing for, other than something that's fairly limited and sort of self-centered to a small or slightly larger group of people within the nation. So for me, one of the big practical things is recognizing lots of anarchists go, like, I'm not going to vote. I'm certainly not, you know, in my country, you know, the Labour Party is certainly the left-wing sort of Labour Party, not very left-wing at all. They're much more like sort of a Conservative Party from the past. So they're going to not vote and not going to be involved in politics. But my message is always like, if you don't vote, you are leaving it to the people who do vote to make a decision about the tone of our oppression. And if you can have a say in the tone and make the tone a better world for more people, by better being like people have more of a chance because rhetorically the tone is that everything's going to be okay for them, then for me, that's something that we have a moral obligation to do. So, you know, I'm a US citizen as well as a UK citizen. I'm going to vote for Biden. I'm going to vote for Keir Starmer. And I vote for both these people. I don't think they're the best prime minister or president we can have, but I think they're better in tone than the other person because of the way their rhetoric presents the image of a country. And in the meantime, whilst doing that, in our individual lives, we need to be sort of practicing everyday anarchism and seeing what we can do without those government structures, introducing friends, neighbors, strangers to different ideas of different types of freedom and autonomy. But to sort of go, I'm going to ignore the current system completely because it's not perfect, is to kind of the point of where things can be made slightly better for some people. And for my money, you know, things like welfare, it's more likely to get cut under a right-wing government than a left-wing government, which means people who are struggling are going to struggle more. Historically, it's what's always happened in every country, UK and US. You know, that is just the case, that if we have a Republican government or a Conservative government, people suffer more in the country. So to me, we need to get rid of that, even if it's not perfect. What the alternative is, you know, the current left-wing flavor of mainstream politics.
I understand. I understand. So we have 8 minutes left, but I want to know if there's any final thoughts that you have, any pieces of advice and or synthesizing thoughts that you want to leave my viewers and fans of Unleashed, Philosophy Unleashed. What do you have, some parting thoughts for us?
I mean, the big thing I would say is just talk to people, and talk to people who don't agree with you. You know, it's really important to hear people's ideas. You know, I just said a bunch of stuff, and lots of people might listen to that and disagree with me, and I'm very happy for them to get in touch and show me why I'm wrong, and have a chat about it. And you know, I think we've got to not be shutting people down who we disagree with. And at the same time, saying that, there's a lot of, you know, online sort of stuff. I think for mental health reasons, sometimes it's okay to not want to engage with every conversation that's available. But you know, if something is if you spend too much time, just like for me, if I just talk to anarchists and listen to anarchists' thought about things, I'm going to not really critically analyze what I believe about things. You know, like I said, I'm an atheist. I've spent my entire career teaching religion. It doesn't force you to change your views because you've listened to other people's different views than yours. It makes you be able to scrutinize and analyze them. So the first thing I'd say is talk to lots of people, and don't shut people down because they've got different views from you, as long as they're willing to listen. And that's the important thing. You know, there's no point wasting your time having the appearance of a dialogue. You know, someone's just doing that and not listening to whatever you say. They're not entertaining. That's a waste of everyone's time. But talk to lots of people, and always just think, you know, whatever you're doing, should it be done this way? Am I just doing it this way because it's the way it's always been done? And I don't just mean that in your personal life, but you know, institutionally. So I said earlier I was writing something about prisons. You know, prisons is a real current sort of issue of mine. And it goes to the schools. You know, we have a problem in society. We know prisons don't work. They've always had criminals. As long as we've had prisons, they're overcrowded. They have more crime happening within them. They have abuse happening within them. They are abhorrent institutions. But we've got this idea that, like, well, something needs to happen to these terrible criminals, right? They need to be punished. And I think we really need to think about that idea of punishment and where it comes from, you know, and why we think that's the approach. If someone's done something wrong, that they need to suffer as a result. And I think back to what I said earlier about religion, you know, that's obviously embedded in many faiths, that bad people get some sort of punishment. We're taught that from childhood. We have parents who can't really control young children, who have to coerce and threaten and say, if you don't do that, something bad's going to happen to you. We have schools where we know that not everyone's necessarily choosing to be there. They're enforced to be there. So schools punish people for breaking rules in schools and force them to do what schools want them to do. So by the time you come out of school, let's say you're 18 years old, you've been told since you were a baby, you know, if something's done wrong, you be punished for it, right? That's what has to happen. So just entertaining the idea that we don't punish people for doing something wrong, that maybe there's a reason they did something wrong, maybe there's some sort of unmet need, and even if there isn't, even if it's dangerous, that we could stop the danger without adding to the suffering and the punishing. So like, lock someone away, sure, but don't lock them in a cell. Lock them in a 5-star hotel, right? We're still safe, they're locked in there, you know, but why are we punishing them more? So I think something like that, something really obvious, that every day we just accept they did something wrong, you know, I better call the police. And again, even anarchists, if you're an anarchist and someone does something bad to you, you might go, I don't like the police, but that person needs to be punished, right? that's a really fundamental thing that we
Mhm.
don't talk about. And so for me, it's like, talk to people who's got different views, but just question, why do we do that thing? Does it actually do the thing it's supposed to do? Does it serve some function? I mentioned punishment because it's inconsistent and incoherent, right? Why should they be punished because they did this bad thing? What did the bad thing do? It harmed someone. Harm is bad, so we should respond to the harm doer by causing them more harm, right? It's an incoherent idea, but we just accept it. And what we really do with punishment is we use it to threaten and coerce behavior for young people who we can't rationally communicate with, right? That's why we really do it.
Mhm.
Or people we can't justify something with because it's unjustifiable, right? When the child at school doesn't want to do the work because they think it's pointless, the teacher can't say it is pointless. It is just for an exam that you shouldn't have to do.
Mhm.
You have to say, well, the rule is you just have to do it or you get detention, right?
Mhm.
And that's incoherent. So that's what we're doing. These criminals, maybe it's something to do with the society we have, and we could be doing better with society to stop there being the need for the crimes in the first place. But instead, we go, well, society's the way it is, so I guess we can't solve that problem. We'll just warehouse them in a cell somewhere. So, for me, like that's the big pressing problem of our day. I think anarchism is great, and I'd love to live in an anarchy. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, but there are currently people in both of our countries suffering in prison cells, being treated the way history books would look at and say, what, they just let this stuff happen in their towns, and they just knew that this was happening and they didn't do anything about it.
Mhm.
And it's a huge issue, and we probably need to be talking more about that and what we can do instead and different approaches to solving criminal problems.